must understand this, my beloved. Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, for your anger does not produce God's righteousness. Therefore, rid yourselves of all sordidness and rank growth of wickedness, and welcome with meekness the implanted word that has the power to save your souls. But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. I told her I'd say this one twice. But be doers of the word, and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. For if any are hearers of the word and not doers, they are like those who look at themselves in the mirror. For they look at themselves and, on going away, immediately forget what they look like. But those who look into the perfect law, the law of liberty, and persevere, being not hearers who forget, but doers who act, they will be blessed in their doing. If any think that they are religious and do not bridle their tongue, but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world.
Thank you, Mark. So we're in week 4 already of this James series. We've been exploring this letter written by James to churches that have been dispersed, churches that have left Jerusalem, left kind of the security of that holy place, and now are out and kind of exploring what it's like to be new religious communities in a world that maybe perhaps doesn't welcome them all that well. And today we're presented with this, really, it's a pretty clear command to be doers of the word, to be doers of the word. I want to explore that with you today. What does that mean, to be a doer of the word? I put a little table where I tried to make a little table on the back of the bulletin. I'd love for you to take the time to take some notes. And we're going to explore a little bit of what it means to be a human being and what it means to be a human doer. Both as the world might define a human being and as God might define a human being. And then to a human doer, how the world and how God might define those two things. I don't know how many of you like to play cards. You remember that this congregation, it was formed out of a card club, so the joke is that New Life is the result of a card game that went bad, right? But some of you laughed at that. I don't know how many of you like to play cards. I enjoy playing certain kinds of card games. There's one particular card game that I don't get. And I don't like, and it really frustrates me. This is why it really frustrates me. I don't understand the rules, and I can't follow the game. I'm going to try to describe it to you, and you may guess what the game is. But you only get a certain number of cards. You only get like 5 cards. Usually you're playing with a teammate, and whether that's usually I think that's across the table. I don't play it enough to know, and because I don't like this game, it really frustrates me. And you have to bid. You have to say, well, I think I'm going to get this many tricks. I think I'm going to win this many hands. You're already guessing what the game is. You have to say, I think I'm going to get this many hands, and I never understand the order because there's suits, right? You follow the diamonds and the hearts and the clubs and the spades, right? But then there's the opposite side. There's what they call trump, right? So those cards are better than the other cards. And I never understand how you can determine how many hands you're going to win, because you're kind of guessing what your teammate has. But then you also have to consider which cards are the cards that are going to be played by suit, and then which cards are going to be kind of won by the other suits because they mysteriously become more powerful than those other suits. And it frustrates me because I don't know how to play the game. I can't figure it out. I hope that you get from what I'm saying right now. I don't like this game. The problem is that my wife really likes to play euchre. And and I don't understand it. I've tried, and this last week we sat down with some friends, and they said, well, let's play cards, and we played some games for a while, and then they said, well, let's try to play euchre, and I could just feel in my belly just kind of this disdain, and now because I don't like it, I go into the game thinking I'm not going to like it, and I'm frustrated by the rules, and I don't understand it, and I don't get how you get a good hand. It frustrates me. It confuses me. And the other thing about it is that I'm embarrassed. I am. In some sense, I'm embarrassed that I don't get the rules of this game. You are all looking at me like, how can you not understand how to play this game? And because you've played it for years, and you understand how it goes. And I in some sense, I'm a little embarrassed that I can't get this game. Religion and a life of faith, too, I think, is often frustrating. And it's confusing. And a lot of times, too, I think that it bears and brings about a lot of embarrassment. Because there's sometimes where we think we understand the rules, but then there's other things that come in and say, well, no, you really ought to be doing this. Or no, you think that you're doing this, but it should be this thing. And we don't always understand. And often, the hand that is dealt us, the stuff in front of us this week, it doesn't seem fair. And it doesn't make sense. And sometimes that's frustrating, and sometimes that makes us angry, and sometimes that's embarrassing. James is beloved by Christians in some sense because it's so clear. Be doers of the word. Don't be deceived, but be doers of the word. What does that mean? Well, let's explore that together. I tried to put a table in the back of your bulletin, and I just wanted to try to compare and contrast human beings as defined by the world and human beings as defined by God. And then I want to finish by comparing human doers as defined by the world and human doers as defined by God. And I don't have any fill-ins, so you whatever hits you, and I hope that this sermon might speak to you, but let's just try to compare that and contrast that. And think about how often we are called to be certain things, and often we're required to do certain things. And sometimes those instructions they're a little bit confusing. Let's try to unconfuse them for just a little bit. I'm reminded of this quote by Rick Warren, who said, that we were created as human beings, not human doers, right? And often we're defined by what we do. One of the first conversation starters at most cocktail parties, right, is, well, what do you do for a living, right? And we're defined by our career. Human beings, as opposed to human doers, human beings, I think, are often defined as people who are present. If we are a human being, we're simply present in the moment in front of us. Rather than constantly thinking, comparing, contrasting human beings and human doers, human beings are people who are present in the moment. Rather than thinking about what's next, rather than thinking about all of the to-do lists, rather than thinking about all of the social media in front of us at our disposal, at our arm's reach at any moment, human beings are often present in the world. But I think that means for a lot of us that our perception of human beings, as opposed to human doers, is that human beings are lazy. Human beings are lazy. If they're just present in this moment, well, what about all of the other stuff that comes at us? Because humans, we've defined ourselves as people who are competitive, one against another, right? As soon as your neighbor mows their lawn, right, you're out there mowing your lawn, right? I mean, we're constantly competing against one another, right? And then sometimes competition is very, very healthy, right? And often it's not, right? We constantly need to keep the latest and the greatest, or the newest and the best, right? And so often human beings, people who are just present and mature in the present moment, are considered lazy, or uncaring, or maybe even not motivated. Let's be clear about this, that human beings, as defined by the world, might be present, but might be thought of as lazy. Human beings, as defined by God, are loved. Human beings, as defined by God, are loved. I taught our confirmation class this first week of confirmation. We're starting with the first article of the creed. I believe in God the Father Almighty, right? Creator of heaven and earth, right? Okay, yep. If God is the creator of me and all that exists, what does that mean for Delbert Hayes? That means that you are a creation of God. You are a creation of God, as you are. Not because of all of the things that you do, but because of who you are. You are beloved creation of God. Now, the really sticky point for confirmation students, you have all figured this out, but the really sticky point for confirmation students is this. Eli, when I ask you if you are a beloved creation of God, because Eli was in confirmation last Wednesday, and he's a great student, so he pays attention, right? If Eli is a beloved creation of God, what does that mean about Eli's arch enemy at school? They are also beloved by God because they are created by God. God is the creator of me and all that exists. So that means that we as human beings, as we are beloved by God. Human beings, as defined by the world, are often defined as lazy. Human beings, as defined by God, need to be defined as loved. I was listening to a podcast named James Mark Comer, who John Mark Comer, excuse me, I'm preaching James. John Mark Comer is a pastor in Portland, Washington, Oregon, right? Thank you. He wrote a book, The Reckless or the Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Ruthless elimination of hurry. And he's talking about the need to be present in the moment. As I was listening to this podcast on my headphones, I had run up to Riverside Lutheran Bible Camp to help them get ready for a women's retreat this weekend. And they said they needed a little bit of help with the grounds, and so I love going up there and spending some time with them and helping them. And so but they said, hey, can you get to this one section? Can you do this one thing? And I said, well, I think I can. And I'm listening to this podcast about the ruthless elimination of hurry, and I'm watching my watch the whole time because I know I have to get back to Norwalk to get my hair cut. And I know that it takes about 55 minutes if everything goes right, kind of, to get from Riverside back to Norwalk. And I was in such a hurry after listening to this podcast about the ruthless elimination of hurry, right? But one of the things that John Mark Comer says is that he begins every morning with a cup of coffee. I think that's important. And by opening himself up to the love of God. They're simply sitting and opening himself up to the love of God. I love that idea. I want to do that. I know that often my mornings are very, very busy, like yours are. But I want to spend more time opening myself up to the love of God. Human beings are beloved by God. You are beloved by God. Eli, what does that mean about your arch enemy? They're also loved by God. He's good singing. Human doers. Human doers, as defined by the world. I just wrote simply one word in my box. They're busy. Right? They're busy. And they're hurried. And they're rushing. And they're constantly competing for the next thing and the new thing and the latest thing and to get better and better and better and better. Human doers are busy. I am. Maybe you've heard this. I've heard this said often. Pastors sometimes will say this. I never take a day off because Satan never takes a day off. Okay, that sounds good, right? I never take a day off because Satan never takes a day off. And the response to that is, I never take a day off because Satan takes a day off. Say this: you might need another role model to pattern your life after. Right? You get that? I never take a day off because Satan never takes a day off. You might need a different role model in your life. Human doers are defined by their busyness, constantly moving, constantly doing, constantly at something, right? And burn the candles at both ends of the spectrum. Early in the morning and late at night, we're constantly doing something. Productivity is not bad. Please don't hear me say that. It is good to produce. Work is good. And when our life is defined by what we do, we might need to check in. We might need to reorient. In fact, that's what Sabbath, that's what Sunday does. It causes you to stop, if just for a moment, and to give this moment to God. And then we get up off of our knees and go about doing the work of God, but for just a moment, we reorient our lives. And rather than being defined by busyness, as human beings are defined by the world, God calls us to be doers of the word. To be doers of the word. Not just to confess that, not just to take this moment and to put it up in a mirror and say, well, I'm going to do this for a while and then I'm going to walk away from it, right? But to be a doer of the word, what does that mean? I think in particular, I'm drawn to Micah chapter 6, verse 8, where we hear the question, what does the Lord require? What does the Lord require of me? And the response is this: simply to do justice, to love God, and to walk humbly with God. Right? We hear that in Micah chapter 6, verse 8. Or in Matthew chapter 5, we hear the Beatitudes, right? We hear all of those people, all of those situations, those who are mourning, those who are hungry, those who are impoverished, those who are without, those people who God calls and claims as blessed. Or perhaps, so that we're not so very confused, right? Like I get very confused at the game of euchre. Simply this. The last verse of our text for today says this: religion that is pure and undefiled before God. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world. So what does it mean? Is a human doer defined by God? That means that we are about enacting the radical care and love of God in the world. To be a doer of the world means that we simply care. Period. We care for people who are in need. And as the church, and as the people of God, especially, yes, for widows and orphans, but do you think we should just put a period there and say, well, it's just widows and just orphans, those are the people that we're going to care for, we're not going to care about any of them? I mean, come on, right? Of course. That means that we care for those in need, for those in distress. As people of God, we are quick to feed the hungry. As people of God, we are quick to visit the lonely. As people of God, we are quick to bring about the kingdom of God by caring for those who are in need. Now, where would you put yourself in this box? In these 4 boxes, are you a human being and you're constantly defining yourself by the ways of God, and so that brings about all kinds of shame, because every once in a while we sit, and every once in a while we meditate, and every once in a while we pray, and we say, well, I can't do that because I got to be doing something, right? Or do we define ourselves as human doers, as defined by the world, and we're constantly busy, we're constantly moving, we're constantly looking for what's next? Might we define ourselves as God defines us, as beloved by God? As people who are created and made in the image of God, we are beloved by God, and that we are called to care. We're called to care, we're called to care, we're called to care. I want to end by being a little bit transparent with you all, and share with you that this last week, for me, it was a weird week. It was a difficult week. It was a hard week. A couple of different things at work, sure. A couple of different things at home, sure. But whatever. It was a hard week. And I remember I told you I ran up to Riverside to mow for them, and then I ran back because I was listening to this, get rid of hurry, and I was in a big hurry to get back for a haircut. And the person who was cutting my hair, she asked me a couple things. We've built a relationship over the last years, and she just kind of offhandedly said, "What do you love about your job?" You know, I think sometimes it's like, "Oh, you're a pastor. What does that look like? What does that mean?" And she said, "What do you love about your job?" And I thought for just a second, and I said, "I love helping people who are in need, people who don't have a firm foundation in their faith. I love expressing and bringing about God's grace and love and compassion. I do. I love that part about my job. But the reality is that that's not simply the pastor's job. If it were just up to me, boy, this city would be in a whole lot of hurt. You and I are all called to be doers of the word. To care for the widows and the orphans, yes. To care for all in their